New this morning, Cornel West is running as a non-affiliated independent candidate, dropping his run under the Green Party banner. He shared the announcement earlier today. Let's watch.
We need you to be part and parcel of wrestling with this corporate duopoly, this two-party system that impedes, it gets in the way of the unleashing of the kind of policies of abolishing poverty and homelessness, of dealing with working wages, cutting back on militarism, and most importantly, trying to ensure that the best of who we are as a people can be more manifest, can be more concrete, because the crisis is real and these catastrophes are bombarding us. Please come join us.
Meanwhile, a new Gallup poll reveals over half of U.S. adults, some 63% to be exact, support a political third party. And that's the highest that's been at since Gallup began polling on the topic in 2008. Respondents said Republicans and Democrats do, quote, such a poor job that a third party is needed. This represented a 7-point increase from the same Gallup poll taken last year.
Gallup also found that Republicans are more open than Democrats to the idea of a third-party alternative. A whopping 58% of Republicans would endorse a third-party candidate compared to 46% of Democrats. 3/4 of independents support a third option. 3/4 of independents. I mean, that's making it look really good for any third-party candidate that has a demonstrated track record of appealing to the right, and that's where RFK Jr. is sitting right now. If he can get 3/4 or anywhere close to that of the independent vote, in addition to a big chunk of the Democrats and the Republicans as well, I mean, that's a real ball game we have.
Yeah, I think those numbers that we're seeing again are the reason why groups like No Labels, why people like Joe Manchin, especially why people like RFK Jr. are really looking at this and seeing, you know, this is probably my shot if I'm going to do this. And I think maybe politically as a country might be the shot to do this because, again, it's very rare that you have sort of this building rematch between two people that both sides kind of hate, and you've got independents, again, feeling in the middle, just lost, and kind of you have a ton of people feeling this sort of political homelessness, having to choose between this preset menu that gives you what the Democrat candidates are selling and what the Republican candidates are selling. And even, you know, within the Republican primary, how many people there are really that different from what you did get and would get theoretically with a second Trump term. I think the difference and what's going to make or break this idea that we might have a shot at a third-party presidential candidate who is a serious contender is whether the American people who are reporting these feelings actually have a chance to vote like it. And that has obviously historically been a huge problem in this country when it comes to ballot access. You have 50 states, they have different ballot rules. Having sort of the infrastructure and the funding and everything else in order to go out and make sure that these candidates, a third-party candidate, has actual shot at this. You know, they could be really popular in one state, but we'll never know if they were popular in the next 5 because they weren't on the ballot there.
Yeah.
And that's sort of just a institutional, just root problem of why third parties often have trouble, not just because they don't have the infrastructure of these parties behind them. It's also that makes it hard for them to even appear before voters to have their shot at being elected.
Absolutely, and we shouldn't frame that, I think, so passively, because the Democratic Party and Republican parties have both worked to crush ballot access in various states where they've passed measures by ballot initiative to have things like ranked choice voting or to get on the ballot. There was a very compelling Green Party candidate in the North Carolina Senate race this last cycle named Matthew Hoh, who got the requisite numbers of signatures to be on the ballot, but who was caught up in court by one of Hillary Clinton's lawyers, actually, who tried to dispute it at every turn. And it becomes a money issue. The parties are obviously very well funded and are able to wear down a lot of candidates and get them so entangled in these legal woes that it detracts from their campaigns and makes it even more of an uphill battle. So at the same time they're doing that, at the same time they're working against ranked choice voting, which would get rid of the spoiler effect, and working against ballot access for third parties, they are complaining about the spoiler effect and using that as a cudgel to convince people to vote for one of the two major parties. Now, having some genuinely apolitical figures in the race, people who were not former senators, who have never had an RRD after their name, whether it's Cornel West or RFK Jr., I really do think makes it changes the posture of this a little bit. When there is someone who is identifying as a something, there is a much easier case to be made that you are pulling votes away from the side that you really want to win. So, you would say to a Jill Stein, okay, well, you're a Green Party. You obviously think liberals are better than conservatives. You're a spoiler for liberals if you continue to be in this race. In this case, RFK Jr. has, on his messaging materials and in some of his speeches, really aggressively nailed the point home that he's a Democrat. I'm a Kennedy Democrat. I'm a Kennedy. I'm a big letters emblazoned upon the website. I'm a Democrat. I'm a Kennedy. But obviously his appeal has been very different than that, largely because of his focus on the war in Ukraine and some of the COVID mandate issues, which have been given more of a hearing on the right than on the left.
Yeah.
And Cornel West is someone who has a reputation. You were just telling me in the break that you remember a conversation that he had with Michelle Bachmann. He's talked to Candace Owens. He has this incredible ability to have really civil, meaningful conversations with people who are very ideologically different than he is. And it's gotten him respect in certain quarters of the country that are not typical of someone who maybe identifies as a green or who identifies as a left-leaning person or socialist.
Yeah, and he's also had a ton of great conversations with Robbie George, a fellow academic, and hearing them come together and just sort of have these debates on these great big ideas is something that's so lacking that it really makes both of them stand out. It's like, oh, you can actually debate the issues and not be lunatics about it, and like we talked about before, not just start throwing ad hominem attacks to try to chill and freeze the other side out. But it's going to be very interesting to see if the American people, a poll is just that moment in time when it's like, who would you vote for? And it may be one of those weeks where like Donald Trump was indicted again, Joe Biden, got lost on a stage, and you're just kind of at the lowest of lows. There's a big difference between that and actually once you have the ballot access, what happens on election day. And one of the best examples I can remember of this is when I was growing up. I grew up in Minnesota. Jesse Ventura becomes the governor of Minnesota, and just this absolute upset that nobody could really fathom, not just because he wasn't a Republican and he wasn't a Democrat, but because he was a former body wrestler. And it's like, how does this even happen? And that to me says that it can happen, because Minnesota, while politically strange at times, Al Franken as senator, Jesse Ventura as governor, if it can happen in a statewide election in a state that was at that point less so, but still a pretty diverse state where you have a range of ages and races and backgrounds and where you're from, if it can happen there, theoretically it could happen in the United States. What is sort of the political ramification of that? What happens if, let's say, an independent candidate wins? What does Congress even do? Because they'll have to then try to figure out, there's not, do the independents, all 2 of them, 3 of them, band together and form a conference and then separate from the Republicans and the Democrats?
Do the squad members finally grow up? I'm doing a lot of gonad analogies today. Do they finally get a backbone?
There you go.
And do what they have intimated that they would do, which is to be in a different party. AOC saying, in any sane country, I would not be in the same party as Joe Biden. Will they finally act on that, or is it just going to keep being rhetoric? I completely agree. I do want to ask about this, what's going on with Cornel West and his campaign. He launched as a candidate with the Movement for a People's Party, which is a newer party effort that was started, I think, maybe 5 years or so ago, around 2020-ish, I think, or maybe a little bit before, by Nick Briahna, who himself, as a figurehead, has been embroiled in some controversy, some staffing and Me Too-style controversies that really took the wind out of the sails of what people hoped would be a kind of a post-Bernie era, independent, progressive ballot line. There was also some accusations of financial mismanagement and questions about whether or not they were doing enough to gain ballot access. So moving to the Green Party seemed to be a good move, but also one that indicated that maybe Cornel West's campaign wasn't as serious. Why didn't they already know about the scandal with the MPP? Why did it have to come to this? Why such a shaky start? Now, moving again away from the Green Party, I hope that we hear more about that. He issued a statement that I don't think is especially clarifying. The last line of the statement reads, "Our Constitution provides for independent candidates to gain ballot access in all states, and Dr. West has begun seeking ballot access as an independent, unaffiliated with any political party. As his movement gains momentum, Dr. West acknowledges and nods in solidarity with the Green Party for their shared values and commitment to justice." What is happening there? Does he feel like the Green Party is too kind of politically stigmatizing for him to really compete if RFK Jr. is in the mix as someone who's kind of unaffiliated? Does he not want to be seen as, whatever the stereotypes potentially inaccurate and negative about the Green Party exist? Does he not want to be tied to that? Does he just want to have more options for his logo color? It's unclear.
It's interesting because in a way, obviously running not as a Republican or a Democrat, third-party runs are not new territory theoretically, but also this does feel different, like we were talking about earlier. You know, we're like, this seems like one of the best shots you're going to have to mount a serious third-party bid. And so I think maybe part of it is just kind of looking around, whether it's the first group or the second group, looking around and seeing, you know, there's, especially with the Green Party, like they're not new and they've never done particularly well at, you know, actually challenging the parties for their stranglehold on who's in the Oval Office. And so it might be something just feeling like, you know, this is sort of unprecedented how unhappy people are with the status quo between the two parties, or together the uniparty, if you want to call it that, as some do. But it might be just him wanting to have as much freedom as possible. And again, if RFK decides, you know, obviously the DNC is not entertaining this idea that there's a primary on their side. So if he wants any sort of future on a ballot, he's obviously not going to be able to run as a Democrat, it seems, unless Joe Biden really throws things around and somehow Gavin Newsom doesn't become the fill-in candidate. And so it might be just wanting to have the freedom that comes with truly running as an independent, unaffiliated with any party, whether it's, you know, somebody who's done this before. I think it would be nice to have the experience of a third party around him who has done this before, but also because this is not the status quo at all, I think it might be a smart move to, you know, bring those people in to work on your campaign and to consult for you, but not to be bound in by whatever guardrails they may have in place.
Yeah, I am worried about whether or not you're giving up too much infrastructure, especially when you're not RFK and you don't have a super PAC at your back. That can do some of the hard work that a grassroots organization like the Green Party, for whatever its faults are, does have those grassroots networks in functioning already. All right, we'll continue to follow, see what happens with these third-party campaigns. Stick around. We have more Rising for you right after this.